So Jude did say before that I put some tongue twisters in there in my bio, so apologies. There's lots of some long words in there. I've got lots of different titles. I wear different hats because I like variety, I guess. And I'm very interested in organisational psychology, and I've held a number of different jobs in my life. Before I was a psychologist, I worked for the Department of Family and Community Services doing sort of co-design, collaborative kind of ventures across human services, government agencies and community organisations. And before that, I was a child protection caseworker. And before that, I owned my own health business for many years. I was a yoga teacher. Welcome.
Sorry,
you're right. And a massage therapist, and did coaching and counselling for people. So I've worked in a number of different organisational contexts, and I guess as an organisational psychologist, come in, just starting. What my area of expertise is in relation to the person in the organisation. So when we talk about mental health in the workplace, the first thing we generally think of is the mental health of the person, and we typically imagine that somebody walks into the work environment with some mental health status, and that might include a mental illness or a mental health condition. The thing about organisational psychology is that it's actually, what's important is the relationship between the workplace and the individual, as well as vice versa. So there's some work-related factors that we know from an organisational perspective that actually contribute to people's mental health and well-being in a positive way or in a detrimental way, which is how come we can get things like psychological injury as a consequence of things that happen at work. So it's the relationship between the two, the person in the organisation and vice versa. So why are we talking about this subject of mental health or psychological health? Well, as I kind of alluded to there or started to talk about, there's a mandatory duty to maintain a workplace that doesn't expose people to physical or psychological harm. So what that means is that those work-related factors that we know from research do contribute to potential psychological harm. We have to treat them in the same risk management way that we would treat a physical hazard. So we have to identify the hazard, assess the risk, put controls in place, and monitor those controls over time. There's a lot of kind of activity and commentary in that space at the moment because it's complex. Like when we talk about a slip or a trip hazard, that's quite easy. Oh, there's a cord on the floor. Obviously, that's a trip hazard. We can identify that, assess the risk. Is it in a part of the room where people are going to walk? Is it in a cupboard where no one's going to come into? So we can put some controls in place. We can eliminate it, potentially, or substitute it, or put PPE on, you know, as a protective barrier for physical risks. Psychological hazards are not so easy to see. So there's a lot of work in the regulator space now in terms of, well, how do we help organisations do kind of psychosocial risk assessments, you know, like how do they manage the complexity of psychological hazards and risks and the consequences for people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Doing the right thing, that's an obvious thing, I think. Depression, like a couple of other mental illnesses, it's the prevalence is increasing worldwide. Now that could be because people are feeling less stigma associated with talking about mental illness and therefore coming forwards and asking for help and then getting diagnosed. So it's a reporting issue really, that there's increased reports as opposed to increased prevalence. I don't know. We could think that maybe the world is changing in some way and actually there are more demands, more pressures on people, more stresses, because we know there's a number of contributing factors that can create or trigger or exacerbate mental health conditions and mental illness. So perhaps there's something about the modern world that is different and adding to the pressures and therefore creating more prevalence of mental illness. So who knows the two most common mental illnesses? Yep, anxiety disorders is a bucket. So underneath that you've got generalised anxiety disorder, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, you've got phobias, you've got social anxiety. And then the other one is the one that depression falls under, which is the mood disorders. So all those depressive disorders and conditions that you've heard about, they're the two most common. And in terms of what you're likely to experience in your own circles and in the workplace certainly, they're the two most common. Early intervention. So what we know is that it's actually really good when people, this is an obvious thing, but I'm going to say it anyway, when we're self-aware. You know, when we know what's going on for us, that's so important in terms of health, physical health, obviously, and mental health is the same. So when we can identify things that are going on in ourselves and we can step forwards and ask for help, that help-seeking behaviour is going to lead to an increased likelihood of a good recovery. So the earlier that you can seek help, so early intervention is really good, help-seeking behaviour is really important. As I say, it aids recovery. What we know is that, speaking of this one here, healthier communities. So what we know is that, who can guess how many days on average over a lifetime someone will spend at work? The average Australian person. What do you think the average number of days over the course of a lifetime is? It's 11,000. So like that's scary. Did you say 10 million?
No, I said too many.
Oh, too many. Yeah, that's scary too. So 90,000 hours, 11,000 days, that's the average amount of time that people spend in the workplace in Australia. So what we know is that workplaces are really important in terms of impacting on our mental health and well-being and physical health and well-being as well. And they're an opportune place to actually affect change. So if we can create more mentally healthy workplaces, then that's going to drive change across communities as well, because obviously you come to work, you go home and you're a member of the community, and things that you learn at work or your well-being is going to carry on and assist you in how you live your life outside of work as well. The other thing here is that we talked about my research earlier, which was the dark side of engagement for older workers. So why do we talk about engagement? Do you guys read LinkedIn articles? Do you follow blogs? Do you read, management, literature? And who's heard of engagement as a concept, I guess, is my question. Okay, so why is there a lot of talk about engagement in the workplace? Productivity, yeah, because it's related to productivity, yes. Why else?
Commitment.
Say it again?
Commitment.
Commitment, exactly. So engagement is the good stuff. So everyone wants to increase engagement in organisations because we know, again from research, that it's correlated with higher performance and therefore higher productivity. Job satisfaction, commitment, decreased turnover, decreased unplanned absences. So mental health is correlated with engagement. Positive mental health, creating a work environment that is mentally healthy is correlated with engagement, and engagement in turn is correlated with all those things as well. So there's individual outcomes and there's organisational level outcomes as well. This is a bit of the why. What we are going to talk about tonight is these things here. So I'm not sure whether Jude has sent you these slides as a PDF already, or they'll come to you. Who's got these slides already? No? Okay, so they'll be coming. So we're going to talk about what mental health is and mental illness is, and the difference between the two. We talked before, one of the questions was about, well, what's the manager's role in terms of mental health? So we'll talk a bit about the manager or leader's role, and a bit about how to take care of yourself and your colleagues at work. And there'll be time, every now and then I'll say, what do you think? Or anyone got any questions? But please do ask questions or butt in or make a comment or, just tell me I'm talking too much or, whatever. Feel free that you can just, come into the conversation rather than it being me just completely delivering stuff. Is that okay? All right, so who could define mental health? What comes to mind? It can be a proper definition, it can be just some things that you're thinking of right now. Yes?
Mental health is a spectrum, good to poor. Everyone's on that spectrum.
Yep.
I guess mental illness is when you move more towards the poor end.
Mm-hmm.
And like with something early, like a bit of anxiety or depression, it can become, like psychosis or something more serious down the further end.
Yep, so this is... Okay, so we've all got it. Great. What else about mental health? Anyone got any other comments?
Yes, it's in the same reality as your physical health.
Yep.
It's your whole self.
Yep.
It's how you give yourself out, it's how you bring people in, it's how you communicate.
Really kind of
people.
shows up, doesn't it?
It's everything.
Yeah, true. So I really like the World Health Organization definition of mental health. So I think it's beautiful, it's comprehensive, and it also makes sense in a workplace environment. So if you look at this definition here, so it's a state of well-being where those 4 things occur. So the first one, somebody realizes their abilities. That means you do stuff you're good at. You use your strengths. So hopefully in the work environment, we're enabled and supported to do stuff we're good at. So I like being with people. So my job's great for me because I get to do things that I'm quite good at and I enjoy. If I had to work out problems with IT, I would just roll over and die. I wouldn't, but I would be sacked because I would not be able to do it. It's not my strength. So hopefully there's a fit, person-environment fit. You have an opportunity to show up at work and do your good stuff. That's that. Cope with normal life stresses. So work's demanding, life's demanding. There are demands in the workplace, and that's a normal, natural part of life. And resilience is a normal, natural part of life as well. So we want to have sufficient resilience so that we can cope with those stresses. Stress is not a bad thing in itself. We'll talk a bit more about that going forwards. The third one, working productively and fruitfully. So good work is really good for people. So what we know is that unemployment is correlated with poor psychological health outcomes for people, because it's very hard to create a strong sense of identity if you haven't got a reason to get up in the morning, and if you're not in that structured work environment. And I use that sort of structured work environment a little bit loosely, because you could be volunteering, you could be part of a community, which takes us to the fourth one, which is contribute to your community. So that could be church, sport, neighbourhood, and of course work community. Retirement can be, unfortunately, not so healthy for people as well, and it depends. I mean, unemployment is not necessarily going to make you mentally unwell, and retirement is not necessarily going to make you mentally unwell. However, it has the potential to do that, dependent upon how you navigate it and how you plan for it. So good work is good for people. Like when you've had a good day's work, you can feel tired, but you feel really kind of satisfied and it's a good kind of tired. It's a sort of rewarding sense of being tired. So that's mental health. So who can tell me one of those 4 things, those 4 attributes of mental health? What can you remember? Yes, I just love the word, fruitfully. Who says that? Fruitfully and productively, perfect.
Doing what you're good at.
Yes, realising your abilities. 2, what else?
Engaging in the community.
Yes, contributing to community. And the last one?
Coping with stress.
Yes, perfect. So that's mental health. Now, mental illness is not that. So mental illness is a medically diagnosed condition. Now, who makes that diagnosis? We talked about, what's the manager's job, what's HR's job, or people and culture. Who makes that medical diagnosis? Yes, so a medical professional. So it's a doctor, it's a psychologist, it's a psychiatrist, it's somebody who is qualified to make that determination, to conduct a proper assessment. And basically, it's based on severe impairment that affects, to your point, mental health. It kind of shows up in different aspects of your life. Mental illness does as well. So mental illness is where there's a severe impairment to one or more than one of those 3 areas: how you think, how you feel, and how you relate to the world, particularly how you relate to others. So they're two different things. And I know that we use language in a way that makes sense for us, but also because we just get used to using language in a certain way. So when I talk about mental health, I know that people in their head are going to be thinking, or a lot of people in their head are going to be thinking, oh right, she's going to talk about anxiety, she's going to talk about depression, she's going to talk about stress. So we go to the mental illness thing because that's how we think of it. Oh, we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace, it's really important. Well, yes, let's have a broad conversation about mental health, including talking about mental illness as well. So in terms of mental illness, a medically diagnosed condition, this is what the prevalence rates look like. It's basically I mean, I generally don't present this slide, but I quite like it because I like the way it's framed as 80% of Australians on any one day won't experience a mental illness. Obviously 20% will. So 1 in 5 people at any one time have a diagnosed mental condition. A diagnosed mental condition is the same thing as a mental illness. 45% of people over the course of a lifetime will have a diagnosed mental health condition. That's nearly 1 in 2 people. So there's a lot of people not talking about their mental illness. Why might that be the case?
Insurance.
Say it again?
Insurance.
Insurance, consequences maybe, yep. Someone over here?
It's perceived as a weakness.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean, you even use that word, isn't that crazy? Like, it's just, I think in some ways we've got a long way to come. Like I do some training around resilience, and that kind of comes up in that conversation as well. You know, that vulnerability is a bad thing, and weakness is a bad thing, and being less than, I don't know what the idealized perfection is, but anything less than that, it's kind of it's seen as it's your fault in some way. You're not trying hard enough, or you're not exercising enough, or whatever it is. And certainly there's things that we can do to better manage our mental health, which we'll talk about, and I'm sure some of them that you'll know very well. Yes, ma'am.
These percentages, is that people who are diagnosed?
Yes.
So essentially it could be more than 80%, but people haven't wanted to progress their feelings to then go and
Exactly. Yeah. So that leads us to this. So I'm going to talk you through this now, and Nick, I'm going to leave this in your capable hands, okay? So keep us where we are. Don't push us forwards until we're ready to go, okay? Or you could, just to mix it up. So I'm going to explain that here, all right? So should I move this over, or is it okay where it is?
That's all right.
That's okay? All right. So we have got... Oh, by the way, if anyone needs to get up, go to the toilet, get a cup of tea, whatever, sort yourselves out, make sure you're comfortable. I'm sure you know the drill, you've been here before enough times. So on this axis, we've got mental health. So we know what that is because we just talked about it. It's those 4 components. So we've got high at the top and we've got low down the bottom. The further you go up, the higher you are in terms of mental health. This axis here is mental illness. We know what that is. It's a medically diagnosed condition, and it's where there's a severe impairment to one or more than one of 3 things. What are those 3 things? Yes, perfect. How you think, how you feel, and how you relate to others. So that's mental illness. So the further we go down that way, it's higher, and low is down here. Does that make sense? Right, we're going to pretend that everyone in the room and everyone in the world can fit into one of 4 boxes. So the first one, people in this box are high on mental health and they're low on, what are they low on? Mental illness. So in the workplace, what might you see? Somebody's in that box, what are they like? How would you describe them?
Effective work.
Effective worker, what else?
Happy.
Happy, what else? Productive, yep.
Communicate fairly regularly with people.
Yep. Yep. What do you think they do to maintain high levels of mental health? What do we know are some of those contributing factors? If I go to the doctor and I say, I just cannot get out of bed, I feel really low, what do you think they might suggest?
They eat healthy food,
Yes.
exercise regularly,
Yep.
maybe they meditate.
Yep. Sleep well, hang out with family and friends, loved ones, do things they enjoy. That's right. You go to a doctor now, people talk about exercise scripts, or activity scripts, because we know that physical activity, and obviously if you're doing it outside or you're doing it with other people, that's extra bonuses as well. Physical activity is really important in terms of not just physical health, but mental health or psychological health. Sometimes I use the word psychological health and sometimes mental health. Again, it's like a language thing. Mental health is like easy to say and easy to understand, except people think, that's mental illness. Psychological health I sometimes use for that purpose. So people won't necessarily think, she's going to talk about mental illness. And psychological health helps me think and helps frame the conversation as being more broad, so we can talk about high performance and cognitive ability, as well as like the mental health, mental illness bit. All right, so that's mental health. We know that. High mental health, low mental illness. Someone in this box is low on mental health, but they're high on mental illness. So what do we see in the workplace? Someone's in that box.
You wouldn't say that.
Yeah, unplanned absences, more unplanned absences. Yep. What else?
Moody.
Moody, yep. What else? Lethargic, yep.
Is that like presenteeism, where they're physically but not really?
Yep, could be. So PricewaterhouseCoopers did an economic analysis in 2014, and they looked at the costs to Australian organisations over the span of a year in terms of not properly managing the mental health and well-being of the workplace, including the workforce. And they estimated that $10.9 billion was lost a year, and I think it was 6.1 billion was from presenteeism, 4.7 from absenteeism, and 168 million from workers' compensation claims, which is what a lot of organisations will go to as a cost. They'll think, oh, it's costly because of the workers' comp claims, you know, the psych injury claims, but actually it's presenteeism, which is somebody who can describe what that means. Chanel, not you yet, because I know you know it. Anyone else know what presenteeism is? How would you describe it?
Mentally absent.
Yeah, so you show up, but like you're 80% there or 50% there, or yeah. I mean, we're all going to go through, you know, peaks and troughs, but basically it's a cost. It's a productivity cost, performance productivity cost.
So it's when you're working on your future leaders project while you work.
Yes.
Oh, that. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So, those are the descriptors we use, like moody, lethargic. I can't remember what else anyone said. Would we know if someone's in that box?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've got a question. That's yes. So to what was your name, ma'am? Michelle. So Michelle's point about people being on a spectrum and mental health and mental illness showing up differently depending on where you are, that's very true. So mental illness is not just one thing. We talked about the two most common, mood disorders and anxiety disorders. Even within those, there's a huge range. And there's also a range in terms of whether it's mild, moderate or severe. So yeah, it shows up and looks different. So my question to you is, as a manager, do you need to know if one of your team has a diagnosed mental illness? Okay, that's the question. So as a manager, do you need to know whether someone in your team has a diagnosed mental illness? And I'm going to get you to show your answer, yes or no, or somewhere in between, by standing. So do you need to know whether someone has a diagnosed mental illness? Yes is here. I want you to stand here. No is down there in front of those like doors that go across, whatever they're called. Okay? So just come and stand, yes or no. Chanel, can you share the question with your buddy? All right, so it's like a yes, no. Yep. Okay, so the question, do you need to know, we've got a very long line, haven't we? Do you need to know, so literally like everyone is like talking about a spectrum, everyone's spread out. Do you need to know whether somebody in your team has a diagnosed mental illness? We've got yes down this end, we've got no down that end, and have we got people in the middle or just that you're not bunching up? So you're not in the middle, you're definitely a no, and you are definitely a yes. What about you guys in the middle? Are you? You're in the middle. Are you? You're a yes, okay. All right, so I'm going to ask the yes group first of all. Somebody who wants to speak on behalf of the yes group. Why did you say yes?
I said yes, just coming from a manufacturing background. There's other risks that may be present if someone does have a mental illness and might not disclose it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess that duty care factor of exposing that person to risks within that working environment.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. Anything else to add from one of the other yeses?
Also, would be able to help that person with adequate care, and even though there are generic facilities that would be available for all the employees to use, as a manager, one can make sure that this employee is getting enough benefits and enough care so that doesn't feel disturbed and can make their life as comfortable as possible in the workplace.
Okay, great, thank you. Who'd like to share for the no's?
I've got a mental illness.
Huh,
So
okay.
it's not illegal or required for me to tell the company when I apply for a job or anything like that. So I've got ADHD, so I don't have to tell them if I don't want to. Well, if I do, I can. You're on that.
So in terms of a manager needing to know or not, you're going to say no because...
It's up to my discretion.
Yeah, because it's not a legal duty. Okay.
Coming from the manufacturing background too, but a slightly different area of it, so I was tossing that up in my mind exactly what you guys were saying. But I guess I sit in the office side of it, so my point of view is that as long as people are being productive and you're getting the work done, if you can notice something about them that maybe they're off and you can't go and help them or say something about it, but I don't necessarily have to disclose it as long as at the end of the day everyone's being safe and the work's being done.
I think you mentioned it being diagnosed, so they're already theoretically being managed. There's nothing we need to do, you know, there's nothing we can change as a manager. We can't fix their issue, we can't do anything, and as long as they're being productive and everything's running fine, there's no need to know.
I think it's around the awareness though, like if someone has a mental illness and they're aware that they can disclose to a manager, they feel more comfortable if they are having an episode or if they're worried about something. So it's kind of an outlet, so they're not trying to hide all the time. So you've got to have that discretion as a manager so that they feel safe in their workforce.
But I think like the key sort of thing with that is that it's up to the person whether or not they want to disclose. And so I'm a mental health first aid officer and also diagnosed mental illness, and from both perspectives it's a very personal thing, and it's always up to the individual, I think, whether or not they would want to talk about it. And obviously managers can be a huge support, but it's just up to the person whether or not they choose to disclose.
Okay. Anyone else want to share?
Just two different discussions, you know. I think your question was about me as a manager would like to know.
Well, need to know was the question.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I said, yeah, I really like, as a manager, I would like to know because of all these reasons. I want to know that the place, the working place is safe, is productive, you know, but as a person who is diagnosed with, mental illness, obviously it's up to him. I cannot force him to come to me and, tell me what's wrong with his life or, what's happening. So I think this is two different things. This is two different views.
So you're saying you'd like to know, but you wouldn't need to know because it's their responsibility and that they're able to make that discretion.
Personally, I think that I need to know as someone who spends minimum 8 hours a day.
So what's the need? Sorry, why do you think you need to know?
Because I think if I know that if someone is diagnosed is in that bad mental situation, then the place wouldn't be safe for anyone. It would be a toxic,
Okay, all right. So it's complex, isn't it? It's complex, and so somebody can say something, and someone else can say something, and someone else can say something, and they're kind of all fair points, aren't they? Anyone else got anything to say that hasn't been said yet? Yes, sir.
I think that it's case by case, and the way I look at it, mental illness is like physical illness. Some of them it is necessary to tell your manager about it. If you have a broken leg, you need to tell your manager about it. Or there are physical illnesses that you need to tell your manager about. There are also mental illnesses that you probably need to as well, but some that you don't, like some physical illnesses that you don't.
Is a broken leg an illness though? Or is it?
No, it also depends on your industry. If you're sitting in an office as opposed to operating heavy machinery next to a main freeway because you're building a new road, it's very different to if you're sitting in an office. And if you suddenly, if you have a breakdown sitting at your office and just people that help as opposed to being in a remote location, that's
I think it's a massive question, the spectrum of mental illness, like from what would be to what.
All right, so I'm going to say something. So in terms of legislation, there's a number of different legislative frameworks that come into this space. So there's privacy, there's discrimination, there's confidentiality, and there's safety legislation as well. And they all come into play. So in most organisations, there's no legal requirement to disclose that you have a mental illness. Okay, so that's generally the case. However, it's not always the case. And the places where it's not the case is where there are some occupations where there's been a legally defensible argument to say that actually we need to not employ people with these characteristics, and there might be some mental illnesses on that list of characteristics. Okay, so that is case by case, but there's a legally defensible reasons. There's a correlation that's been made with mental illness and your ability to perform that job. So that's one thing. In terms of your ability to perform a job, when we all sign an employment contract, we're saying we're fit for work. So that's physical fitness and psychological fitness and cognitive fitness. So if I know there's something that actually has impaired my ability to perform my inherent job requirements, I actually do need to disclose that, whatever that may be, because I'm employed according to a contract and I've said that yes, I can perform these inherent job requirements. And if actually that's not true, then you know that's not the done thing. There's one thing that trumps privacy and confidentiality, and some of you have talked about that a bit before, and that's safety. So if I am on any medication for anything physical or anything psychological, and that medication is going to impair my ability to perform my job safely, whether it's heavy machinery, whether it's driving, whatever it is, I actually need to disclose that. You know, that's a risk to myself and potentially others. Now, if you're a manager and somebody has disclosed a mental illness to you, the same thing applies. You need to abide by privacy legislation and hold responsibility for maintaining confidentiality unless there is a risk of immediate harm to that person or others. So safety trumps confidentiality. Now, in terms of what you can do as a manager to provide a supportive work environment and a duty of care and being able to provide supports and make reasonable adjustments and accommodate difference in the workplace, then there's certainly a case to be made for really well understanding your individual people's needs, whether they're from cognitive diversity or physical diversity or mental diversity or whatever it is. So it's an obvious thing, isn't it? You know, how can we create a work environment that's going to be conducive to you doing your best work? What do I need to know about you, how you best work, so that I can support you to show up at work and do your best work? So the kind of environment that you create in terms of safety, in terms of trust, in terms of support, in terms of care, that is going to create an environment that is either more conducive or less conducive to people sharing themselves with you. Like if I have just given up cigarette smoking, has anyone smoked cigarettes? Brilliant. So what you do, okay. So when I was younger, I smoked cigarettes and I gave up smoking cigarettes, and I couldn't sit down and write a shopping list, let alone something more complicated, for about a week, because I was just so habituated to having my cigarette when I did it. It really helped me sort of organise my thinking. And I was miserable, and I was a bit of a rat bag. You know, I was very irritable as well, so I wasn't the nicest person to be around for a while. So I could show up at work and I'd have all those characteristics. Oh, she's moody. You know, wow, she's like snapping at people. She's irritable. What is going on? Is it a mental illness? No, she's just given up smoking. If somebody has died who is important to you, then we would all go through a natural, normal process of grief. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but like it's not an easy thing to go through. And it's going to show up in how you are in terms of yourself and your ability to do your best work and be, you know, fully present in the workplace. So there are a number of circumstances that can then happen to an individual, life events and things that go on for an individual. Some of them are not a diagnosed mental illness, but they're personal things or life things that go on. So it's not all about mental illness, and I guess that's one of the points that I'd like to make here. We want to know about our people at work, we want to know about mental health, we want to know about mental illness. Don't get caught on the mental illness bit as being, that's all we need to be. Do they have a mental illness, yes or no? Right, we can move on. And another thing that can happen is that if you do know somebody has a diagnosed mental illness, we think categorically as human beings, and stereotypes and, heuristics and like, great, got that sorted, let's move on to the next thing. So if I have disclosed to Chanel that I've got a mental illness of whatever kind, say I've got an anxiety disorder, I've disclosed that to Chanel, and then I behave in a certain way, or my work drops, my performance drops, or I start missing stuff, or I don't deliver things on time like I used to, what's she going to think? She's going to probably think that, oh, that's her mental illness, because that's how we think. So kind of be mindful of that as well, because it's a very easy place to go as an explanation if you know that label or that thing about a person. So it can be helpful because you can provide more support, but also it can really stop you thinking more broadly. Does that make sense? Okay, any other questions or comments about that before we explain this a bit further? Okay, and it's, have a seat again. And it's, it's complex, and these are things for you to think about. So I'd be thinking about, how can I create a work environment for my people so that they feel safe and trusting of me to share what's going on for them, so that I can create an environment that enables them to do their best work, regardless of whether they have a mental illness or not. All right, so somebody in this box, low on mental health and high on mental illness, you might not know as a manager that they have a mental illness. As we've said, 45% of people over the course of a lifetime have a diagnosed mental illness, so it's very likely that a lot of people don't know that's going on. What I would hope for, though, if they're low on mental health, there's going to be some, I would think, some signs, some symptoms, and I would hope that somebody knows. So what we know is that employees are more likely to share stuff like that with other employees, with their peers, rather than their manager, for obvious reasons. So I would hope that somebody in the workplace notices this, that there's somebody who has a close enough relationship with a person. All right, so that's that. Someone in this box, they're low on mental health and they're low on mental illness as well. So I generally live up here. I'm quite lucky in some ways. Like, some of the contributing factors to mental illness are things like trauma, really stressful life events. Being in certain minority groups, you've got more vulnerability, more potential of having a diagnosed mental disorder. So there's that. I take care of myself. As I said, I used to have my own health business. I've meditated since I was however old, and I'm fit and active, and I eat really well. And I love my job as well. That's really, it supports my mental health. So I generally live up here. I've got 2 sons, and they mean the world to me. If something happened to one of my sons, I would take a hit with my mental health. I would drop down, I can guarantee it. And then what happens is that creates a bit of a vulnerability. If your mental health is low, it creates a vulnerability. So we know that other things that can happen can trigger a mental illness potentially. So somebody could show up at work and they're horrible, like they're a bully, or they're just unkind or whatever. That's going to be another trigger for me. Okay, so that's that. What about here? So up here we can see that someone's high on mental health and they're high on mental illness. Who knows somebody who has got a diagnosed mental illness and they're really functional? Yeah, I would hope that we would all be putting our hands up now. So Are You OK Day is coming up on the 12th of September. I can guarantee you on LinkedIn, on whatever social media things that you tune into, there will be people who stand up and say, I have an anxiety disorder, or I have had postnatal depression, or I have a mood disorder, or whatever I have, and I happen to be CEO, or I happen to be looking after 3 kids under the age of 5, or whatever it is. You're functioning in your life and you've got an identified diagnosed mental illness, because it is possible. Now, we've talked a bit about what that might be happened through. I didn't say that very well, that was very clumsy, but basically it's having insight into what's going on for you and seeking help. So that help might be you go to the doctor, you get a treatment plan, You get an exercise script. You know, join this support group. Go to the movies more, you know, go and do those social events that you love to do, or read more, or whatever it is that you love to do. Take care of yourself in those active ways and get the help and the support that you need. And what's your work environment like, by the way? You know, what's your manager like? And, you know, how are you feeling about work? And so it's all those things that contribute to enable your mental health to be quite strong, and you have a diagnosed mental illness as well. So my point is that if we can talk about elevating and enhancing everybody's mental health, it kind of like, it takes the pressure off whether there's even a need to know about if there's a diagnosed mental illness or not. So I want you to turn to the person next to you and just share one observation or some sort of comment about what the conversation has been thus far. Just turn to the person next to you, or 3 if there's an odd number, and just share how you're going so far. What else?
Just so you can transfer between, you know.
Yeah.
You're not set.
Absolutely. If you think 45% of people over the course of a lifetime, but only 20% on any one day. So yeah, you could have postnatal depression. You know, I had my kids 30 years ago. I could have had postnatal depression and then never had an episode since, you know, theoretically. So yeah, you can absolutely move around. I don't want to paint a picture that's kind of too bleak in terms of, oh, we're so vulnerable to mental illness. What I want to do is paint a picture of, like, let's all work well on creating positive mental health. You know, that's the focus, regardless of whether there's mental illness there or not. And I'm a really big believer in getting support from people who are professionals, because, like, you know, get your finances done by an accountant rather than, you know, your mate, and get your tiling done by a tiler. You know, it's like there are experts in the world for good reason that have the expertise. And of course we all want to have some capacity and do bits ourselves, but, you know, calling on experts is a really, really great strategy as well. Who works in an organisation where they have an EAP? Who knows what EAP stands for? Yeah, so that's what it is. So what was your name, sir? Aaron. So Aaron, do you know much about, because I'm going to get you to describe it, do you know much about your EAP, or should we get someone else to describe it?
Yeah, so our EAP, it's open to the worker or the worker's family, so they get 6 free counselling sessions per year. If they need more, then we can accommodate that as well, but generally that's what it's there for, so support, counselling.
Yep. So EAP providers, there's a whole range of different models that work for when you've got a small or medium or large organisations. There's different types of programs and offerings that they have. But basically they are professionals, so they're psychologists or they're counsellors, and they are trained to support people, and not just in need, but also to maintain good levels of health as well. So an obvious thing is that if you are struggling with something, either financial or work or personal or health or relationship or whatever, then seeing a professional can assist with that. But the other aspect of EAP is that often they have a facility that's called something like Manager Support or Manager Assist or Manager Plus. But basically it's a separate facility that enables your managers, your people leaders, to tap into them as a kind of phone a friend, phone a coach, get some support to be a good manager, which is a really underutilised functionality. I mean, EAP providers are underutilised everywhere anyway. Like I want to say this, and I was going to say, I want to say this respectfully. I don't know that if I could say this respectfully, but I think that they've been lazy. I don't know if you can say that respectfully. They've underperformed in the past, but that, you know, I think they're picking up their game because we're expecting more and we know more of what's available, and so EAP providers have come a long way. So the average utilisation rate is either 4.5 or 6.5% across all industries. It's not a lot, and so I've worked in organisations where it's been less than 1% of utilisation, so people who actually use that service. So the Manager Assist is the kind of thing that you can think about, like, so say I'm a manager and I don't have a lot of experience in having "are you okay" conversations. And I know I've got to have this, or I really want to have this "are you okay" conversation with someone I'm concerned about, but I just don't know how to approach them, or, you know, I'm worried, what if they say, no, I'm not okay, what do I say next, you know, and like I haven't had much practice. So what you can do is you can phone up your Manager Assist EAP provider and you can say, look, I've got this awkward conversation to happen, I really want to do it, but I just don't feel equipped, I don't feel confident. can we have a bit of a practice, or can you give me some guidance, or can you tell me some questions that would be helpful to ask, or what if they say this, then what do I say? So you can use it as a kind of coach support in your capacity to be a manager, a more effective manager in this space.
So I think on the AMOK website as well, they've got like a list of questions.
There's so many resources available. Yeah, I've brought some of them with me tonight. But yeah, Black Dog Institute is brilliant for downloadable resources, Sane, Lifeline, Beyond Blue. There's great public resources available. Maybe Jude, when he sends out these slides, I might just connect and just get some resources sent out as well. But it's the kind of thing that, like, what was your name? Bridget? Bridget. So Bridget is a mental health first aider, so she's obviously done training. There's so much training available, but there's also a lot of information that you can become more literate, I guess, in mental health and mental illness, you know, because there's a lot of information. So if you're keen to know more, you know, have a Google and read some stuff, because it's the more that we can know, you know, knowledge is power. The more that we can know, the more we can demystify it and not feel like it's this scary thing that, oh, what do I know? I'm not a psychologist or a counsellor, you know, like, it's all scary. It doesn't have to be that scary. Okay, anything else to add before we move on? Was that helpful to think about mental health and mental illness in that way? What's one way it's going to affect how you are with people in the workplace? Thinking like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Observant of what?
Where they sit.
Yeah. So.
Fruitiness. The fruitiness.
The fruitiness. Is fruity a good thing or a bad thing?
Good.
It's good. Okay. More fruity. Okay. Oh, sometimes I feel my age. Okay. Thank you. All right. So what is your role in creating a mentally healthy workplace? So let's talk about how you as a leader could influence the well-being of your team. So we've introduced a new word, well-being. You know, and like again in this, you know, messy soup of words and constructs and what they mean. We talk about mental health, does it mean this? We talk about mental illness, we talk about well-being. So well-being, whatever that means for you, what are some of the ways that you can influence the well-being of your team?
Managing the team to utilise the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. So some people might be weak in something and it might have something to do with an illness or something outside, but that's probably not the strong point. That's probably not why they're employed. But
yep.
You force that person into a position that you're making them uncomfortable because they're not capable of doing that. Not really effectively managing all of the strengths of your team.
Great.
So I'm terrible at writing, so if my boss makes me do too much writing, he knows it's not going to be great to do a finished product, but I've got other strengths I think. So you can balance your team out by knowing the strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's beautiful. What else?
Their workload.
Yep.
Just ensuring that people aren't overloaded for an extended period of time.
So how would you find that out if they're overloaded for an extended period of time?
Engagement.
And talking to them, engagement. So how would you measure engagement?
By understanding what they're doing with the rest of their time,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that they've got some form of compromise, and if it's been a period of time that they've lost that for, trying to bring some of it back to balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
How was your weekend? Oh, I worked the weekend.
It's a bit of a sign, isn't it? Yeah. How else do you influence the well-being of your team?
Managing leave balances.
Yep.
So ensuring that if someone does have excessive leave, then maybe identifying that.
Yes.
Like getting them to take a break or
Yep. So that leads, beautiful. So that leads me to think of what you're doing as a leader in terms of role modelling. So there's a whole heap of things that we can role model and that they're going to influence well-being in a negative or in a positive way. So hands up who has had a manager who has influenced their well-being in a negative way. Okay. So without identifying anyone, who'd like to share something that their manager did, that who wants to share a little bit about, you know, what did they do that influenced in a negative way? Bridget.
This is really bad. So I had a manager who used to come into work every day and say, oh, I just want to kill myself.
Ooh.
I nearly drove my car off the road. I'm sick of this. literally constantly, to the point where I reported her for threatening suicide. So she wasn't obviously kidding about it, but then they basically forced her on mental health leave because of it. But yeah, there's obviously very.
So that's an extreme example. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. But I like it that you took action. So what can happen is that leaders, I mean, they've got power, haven't they? Not only have they got power, they've got power over us. So to be able to question or challenge or even show care and support sometimes for your leader can be, or your manager can be, you know, a little bit awkward, can be a bit of a hard conversation sometimes. What's another way that you have been negatively impacted by? Yep.
I had a manager who, we were all in the same room, and for our half-hour lunch break, he would sit at his computer, and it just developed a feeling in the team that everyone else should stay at their computer at lunch, which I think just subtly affects mental health in the workplace. And he moved on, and I ended up getting that role. And so I just started a thing where, why don't we all go outside? And so a couple of times a week I would say, oh, come on, let's go outside. And it slowly shifted so that it didn't need my involvement to get everyone outside in the sunshine every lunch.
Beautiful. So that's exactly right. So there's this thing called social contagion. So the good and the bad of what influential people do, and people that you just live with as well. You know, anyone that we're in contact with, basically, like we can. There's emotions that are contagious, and behaviours that can be contagious as well. Social contagion. So particularly somebody who is important, like leaders, they set a tone by what they do rather than what they say. They give permission implicitly, if not explicitly, and sometimes it's explicit as well. So we all watch our leaders to see what is permissible or what is like desirable and what isn't, because it matters. You know, we're herd animals, and you know, we need to be included in the group and protected and so forth. So it matters what our leaders are doing. Like there's whole heaps of research to show that in a meeting room, if somebody asks a question, people will literally, maybe not turn their heads, but they will turn their attention to the leader to get the leader's response before they respond. Because we need to get in line, you know, like we've got to, that's, and I know that that's not always true, you know, but there's like the 5%, but typically that's what happens. So leaders are very influential. Leaders do affect the well-being, influence the well-being of your team, whether you know it or not. So you might as well be purposeful with it. And you've given some really good examples of how to do it in terms of role modelling, in terms of changing behaviour, in terms of challenging some behaviours that are absolutely inappropriate, in terms of thinking about some of the demands, you know, the workload. And what did you say again? What was yours?
Knowing your team, I suppose.
Yeah, strengths. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Absolutely. And that comes back to that mental health definition, doesn't it? You know, if those four things, realising your abilities, if that's one of those four components of well-being, of mental health, and somebody is actually creating a work environment where they're consciously supporting that, like you can see how the workplace can be a really beautiful place of support for people's mental health and well-being. You know, we don't have to wait till the weekend, we don't have to wait till, you know, the end of the day. We can actually get good stuff, supportive, productive stuff for our mental health from the workplace. You can influence the well-being of your team by giving support as well. So you can have instrumental support. You can make sure that your team has access to IT that works, has extra resources at peak periods of work. You can advocate. Doesn't always happen, does it? You can advocate and you can push back in terms of deadlines or, you know, a change management piece that feels like it's been inherited from the US. But, you know, what can you control? What is within your span of control and your area of responsibility that you can influence in a positive way? Any questions or comments about that before we move on? Okay, so this is a model that I use whenever I talk with any organisation about managing mental health or addressing mental health in the workplace, because there's general consensus across the world the Canadians, the Brits, the Europeans, and in Australia we're doing it as well. We all know that in order to properly manage mental health and well-being in the workplace, we need to use these 3 levers because they all impact. So there's prevention of psychological injury, there's the promotion of mental health and well-being, and there's support of those in need. And you can see that on the bottom there, there's a kind of chronology of when the intervention would happen. So we want to be preventative, proactive, but we also need to be responsive when there's a need to respond. Now, in terms of whose role it is, it gets kind of interesting because who do you think in an organisation in terms of business units or directorates, who generally would manage the prevention of psychological injury space?
We're talking corporate level sort of stuff?
Yeah.
HR?
Yep, and who else? Management and... Yeah. So it's like, it's WHS kind of stuff, isn't it? Who manages the prevention of physical injury? You know, that's, but it's obviously these aren't fixed boundaries and they should all talk to each other. That's the point, that it needs to be integrated. So that's the prevention of psych injury. Promotion of mental health and well-being, that's kind of an HRE, people and culture, you know, how do we get better performance and productivity? That's generally that. Talent management, you know, leadership stuff, leadership development. Support of people in need, again, that's probably HR, do you think? Yeah, that's the EAP stuff, the return to work, stay at work. But you as a manager, you as a leader, that's the way for you to sort of scan your work environment as well, because they're all things that you can have influence over. So in terms of prevention of psychological injury, we're not going to talk about it tonight because we just run out of time, but there's some psychosocial risks. Psychosocial just means the relationship between the person and the environment. Psych is the individual, social is the context. So psychosocial, it's like, you know, me in the workplace. There's psychosocial risks that you need to be aware of in terms of high job demands without sufficient support, or incivility. So if there's like, you know, workplace conflicts happening or change management isn't happening well, they're all psychosocial risks that if left unaddressed, then they can potentially lead to psychological injury as well. So you need to have a bit of awareness about that. Promotion of psychological health and well-being. Who wouldn't want their people to utilise their strengths and do their best work? So as a manager, that's what you need to be aware of too. And supporting people in need, that's generally the bit that we kind of go to first when we think about mental health in the workplace. So, wow, if someone's not okay, how do I support them? You know, the conversation we had earlier about, yes, we want to know as a manager because we want to provide a supportive environment and we want to literally provide support ourselves. That's that bit there. So that's your job, to think in an integrated fashion. When you think about mental health in the workplace as a leader, it's thinking about those 3 kind of areas of influence. Any questions about that? So
recently one of my colleagues got a family emergency, so my close family member got serious injury, and I, you know, tried to be supportive. You know, for example, you know, I, you know, give him, you know, non-acting, you know, he wants, and also, you know, discuss about workload. But for me, you know, I'm from a different culture. I'm not sure, you know, is that like enough supportive, or you know, I could be like over the line a bit, you know. So, is there any extra I can do, you know?
Yeah, it's. I mean, how do we know what's enough? I guess it's we ask people, you know, how can I support you?
Yeah.
What, and if somebody says that they want our support, what does that support look like for you? What specifically can I do that would support you right now? How can I support you to best take care of yourself? So you're keeping people with their own responsibility and autonomy, but you're also asking how you can support. So that's what I would suggest. And again, you know, it's if you have a manager assist, you know, or if you have somebody in HR that you can have conversations with, or we're going to do a bit of a role play coming up as well. So a bit of an example, a bit of a practice about how to have a conversation. You know, without knowing the details, you know, I mean, one thing I'd say is that if you offer support, or if you have a conversation, kind of don't end it there and walk away and think, tick, job done. Because you really want to check back in. And sometimes it's like kind of tapping on a door. Sometimes you might ask somebody, is everything okay? Like I've noticed that generally, you come in early and you're really kind of like ready and sitting at your desk, but I've noticed the last couple of weeks, like you've been late every morning, and I'm just wondering, is everything okay? And somebody could say, yeah, I'm fine, no problem. And then you could say, okay, great, we're just checking in if there's anything I can do, if anything you want to talk about, something going on in your personal life, my door's always open to you. So that's that. So you could walk away and think, okay, job done. But if it goes on, then you might want to go back in and have another conversation. So you're kind of tapping on the door until somebody potentially feels safe enough or secure enough or trusting of you to actually open the door for you. So you could say, okay, great, so we've had this conversation now, and how is it for you if we check back in? Or I'd like to check back in another week, or a few days, or at the end of today, or whatever the time period is. Would that be okay for you? So you kind of set that up as well, that it's not just going to be a one-off. All right, so your role, I don't know whether you can read that. I have to stand really close to read it. These are some of the things about your role in creating a mentally healthy workplace. Protect against psychological injury, promote, support. We talked about those three things. Seek advice. Like, are there other managers? Have you got a mentor? Have you got somebody that you trust that you can get some advice about, hypothetically or de-identified? Or if you need something confidential, find your EAP. You can use your EAP provider for that as well. Take appropriate action to facilitate recovery and rehabilitation. Yeah. Confidentiality, we talked about that. What trumps confidentiality? Yeah. One thing that you can do, so say you're a manager and somebody, so Nick and I are having a conversation, and then Nick discloses something to me about a mental illness, and I think, oh my God, I'm just out of my depth. I do not know what to say. I do not know what to do. What could I do? What would you do if that was you in that situation? Yeah. Have you thought of, well, you do that. Encouraging help-seeking behaviour is really, really important, because you're not someone's counsellor. You're not someone's mother or father, So you are still a manager, even though you're offering support, and it's managerial support. So you want to signpost to professional support. Have you thought about having a conversation with your GP? Have you thought about, can I suggest that you contact our EAP? Here's the number. If you'd like, we can phone them together. We could do that now. What I was going to say is that one thing that you can do is you can say, so if you're feeling like you're out of your depth and here you are, you've got this situation, you don't really know what to do, you could say, you know what, Nick, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I really appreciate it. I just don't feel equipped to be able to properly help you right now. Do you mind if we call EAP, or do you mind if we bring HR in to have this conversation together? Because I feel like it would be, it'd be better support for you or better help for you. Would that be okay? Like, most people would probably say, yeah. So you can, you don't have to just sit and really struggle with something on your own, is what I would suggest. Raise awareness to reduce stigma, eliminate discrimination, promote diversity and inclusion. So sometimes I say to people, I want to create workplaces where at lunchtime I can be sitting eating my lunch and I can take my meds, and no one cares whether it's for diabetes, or I don't know whether you take medication for diabetes, to be honest. I know there's insulin, but you do? Okay, thank you. So diabetes or high blood pressure or anxiety or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. We're just all really grateful that we've got medication that's available, so it's not like, oh my God, it's like, oh, is that a mental illness, then, well, what's wrong with them, or, I think some people before talked about how they want to create a safe environment. So if somebody is having an episode or whatever, I can't remember the language used, something like that, in terms of safety. So I just thought, it reminded me, and I've just thought of it again, I wanted to share with you. Sometimes there's an association that's made, particularly in the media, about mental illness and violence. So the statistics are that somebody with a mental illness is not more likely to be violent or aggressive than somebody without a mental illness. So somebody with a mental illness is more likely to be a victim of violence compared with somebody without a mental illness. Why might that be the case?
The vulnerability.
Yes,
about.
Exactly.
More submissive.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, there are some you know, there's spectrums. There are some psychosis type mental illnesses that might have some paranoia associated with them, that might have some behaviours that lead to violence as a consequence, maybe. So there is some relationship there. And then there's self-medication, so drug abuse or prescription drugs or illegal drugs, non-prescription drugs. And so you might have somebody with a mental illness and somebody who is affected by drugs and violence altogether. So you think, well, okay, so what's causing the violence? You know, maybe there are, people have personalities that are more aggressive as well. So just be mindful about that. So having a mental illness doesn't necessarily make you more violent. As I said, you're more likely to be a victim of violence rather than a perpetrator. Okay, so let's talk a bit about taking care of yourself. Let's talk some more, I should say, and your colleagues at work. So we've talked a bit about some of the symptoms, and what are the things that you might notice in somebody in terms of, or you might identify in yourself about early warning signs. So they could be early warning signs of mental illness or just mental distress or low mental health. So what are some of those early warning signs? So if we talk about body and behaviours, what might you see in somebody in terms of behaviours or something that's going on with their physical self in terms of early warning signs?
Always tired.
Grumpy, snappy, always tired. Yep.
Physically weight gain or loss?
Yes. So there's a key there, which is change. So change in sleep, change in sex, change in eating, change in alcohol use, change in behaviour. So I think somebody, it might have been you, sir, who made the point about, there was something about knowing your people and knowing what normal is for them. Was that you who said that earlier on? Yeah. Yeah. I think it was so wise. I should have written it down at the time. Because, so if you know what the normal is for your mate or your person or yourself, then it's, what's abnormal, what's outside of the norm. Because some people are just quiet. Some people are solitary people. I'm not a people person, to be honest. Like, I like being with people, but then I just have to go home and be by myself for a while afterwards, to recover. So for me, I'm not like the most extroverted, loud person, but some people are and some people aren't. So, this thing about happy, like some people are more optimistic than others, that's great, but not everybody is like that. So just because somebody is quiet or a bit pessimistic or, lower in their energy doesn't necessarily mean it's a sign of some distress. So I guess what we want to do is we want to gather data, don't we? We want to create a kind of composite picture by drawing in information from different places. So we want to know our people, know ourselves, know what the normal is, be aware of changes, though a change, that's interesting, let's explore a bit more or get some more information from somewhere else. I used to work in an office, and me and my friend Jen, we used to work, and we had a boss for a while, and she was acting in her position. So it was quite a high position, and she was acting in it. Then the job became permanently available, so she went for it, and she didn't get it. So not only did she not get it, but the person who got it was someone that she didn't like. So she was not happy, and in fact she was worse than not happy, she was miserable. And if she showed up at work, so she still had to kind of act in the position while the recruitment thing finalised. So if she did show up at work, so she was away a lot more, she showed up at work, she would be in her office for a while, the door would be closed, she'd come out, she'd be crying, it was really, emotionally very intense. But when she showed up, what me and Jen would do is we would look at each other, because we would know about how she was going to be based on whether she put her lipstick on or not. So if she put her lipstick on, we thought, great, we're right for a few hours, because that was a sign for her. So we got to know her. Because you know how sometimes if you're like just overloaded with stuff, you kind of give up on your self-care a bit, don't you? So one of the signs might be people showing up, they're a bit dishevelled, or they're wearing the same clothes, or their personal hygiene is affected, as well as their work being affected. Any questions or any comments or anything to add? Bridget, is there anything else to add to that from your training and your knowledge?
No, I think the main thing that you said was just noticing that there's a change.
Yep. Yep. Any other comments? Any other questions? Yes?
I also think intuition. You kind of get a feel that something's up with someone.
I could talk for hours about intuition, and not all of it is good. Because, again, intuition can be good if you're using the right data to form your impression. Sometimes I think I don't even really know what intuition is, but other times I think, well, actually, it's split second, make a decision before your cognition has time to do the thinking for you. So you make you react or you respond that's based on stuff that you've built up over time from your experience, and it's a kind of a quick way that you can react. It's a probability thing based on what has worked in the past. I think that's my sense of it. But in terms of how I feel, I don't know. I mean, it depends. I don't know. But what I would say is that if you're feeling something, if you have a sense of what your intuition is, and that served you really well, and that for you is a flag, then I would follow that.
I think even just a quick discussion, everything okay with you saying?
100%. 100%. Check it out. Yeah. I'm not sure, but I just have a sense that I just thought I would, have a chat. Could we go and have a coffee? Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like it's using it as a source of information, and then you're going to test it out. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so if somebody is struggling in your team, what can you do to support them? I'm a big fan of well-being conversations rather than are you okay conversations. Like, say that you're in a work environment and no one talks about mental health, no one talks about mental illness, and then all of a sudden it's are you okay day and everyone's having are you okay conversations. I think, oh, really? Like, where's it come from, And also if a manager sits me down and says, let's have an are you okay conversation or a mental illness conversation, I feel like you haven't done the spade work or created the conditions or planted the seeds so that this is a kind of normal thing. So I'm a big fan of let's have more well-being conversations, and you kind of fertilise the environment, fertilise the soil, so that if you do have to have an are you okay conversation, you kind of set up some stuff there. You've developed some trust, some relationship, some normality about it, so it doesn't just jar out and sit on its own out of nowhere. So what do I mean by regular well-being conversations? When you think of a well-being conversation, what is that?
I tend to talk about a lot of things or bring up stuff about outside of work. I don't tend to talk about what's going on at work, because most people don't really care. They're working to live, so if they're stressed, it's usually outside of work, and they're bringing it in.
So you want to know about a person and their life and be like a normal person. Yeah, 11,000 days, 90,000 hours. We kind of want to have some normal conversations about the whole person. So when you show up at work, you don't become a different person. And when you leave work, and the boundaries are really blurred now compared with how they used to be in the past anyway, for obvious reasons, because working across the world and different time zones and electrical links to colleagues and your work environment as well. So all those boundaries have become much more blurred. So in terms of talking about work versus talking about non-work, it's probably great that you have conversations about the whole person as well as just work-related stuff.
Because if you understand their hobbies, you can get them to start talking about other related things, or if you know they've got kids or family, or just about knowing more about the people you work with. Yes, and that's going to tie into helping in terms of bringing out people's strengths and career development goals, and getting to know who they would likely best to work with if you're putting team members together, and knowing what they've got going on for them. If I know somebody's got a child who is under the age of 6 months, I'm going to think, well, their sleep probably is going to be a bit affected, isn't it? Really. So, they're under some probable stresses, some demands in their home life, or they've just separated, or they've just gotten married, or they've just had a child, or they've just, lost someone important to them, or they've just moved from one, location to another. They're all factors that are going to influence somebody's mental health and well-being. So when you can be aware of that, you can kind of factor that into how you're optimizing their the likelihood of them doing good work, basically, and being cared for. So can you tell me what works best for you when you're feeling upset or overwhelmed or distressed? What can I do to help you take care of yourself? Obviously knowing what's available to you in terms of the supports. Lifeline, get to know that number.
You know, so that you've got some things kind of in your back pocket that you can pull out as supports, as well as just you as the manager. All right, so the basic tenets of having an "Are you okay?" conversation: you ask, you listen, you don't judge, you encourage action and often offer support, and you check back in. So we've kind of talked about those things before. The thing about managers and leaders is that you're really good at solving problems. You're really good at finding solutions, which is brilliant for obvious reasons. But what can happen is that you get very quick to want to do that rather than to have, I guess, a more a different attitude, which is to allow somebody else to come to their own insights or their own solutions. So if I had somebody who worked for me, and it wasn't a heavy machinery or driving, there was no safety kind of thing, so that's sorted. So they arrive late, they've arrived late for the last 4 mornings, and so they arrive late again. I say, you know, Chanel. So I'm trying to think whose name I know. So Chanel, I remember Chanel. So I say, Chanel, you know, like you know, I've noticed that you've arrived late the last 4 mornings, you know, and that's uncharacteristic for you. Just wondered, is everything okay? What's going on? And Chanel says, oh, you know what? I've just been diagnosed with a mental illness, and I've been given this medication, and it's making me really groggy, and it's making it just really hard for me to get up in the morning. So as a manager, what do you think I could say or do? What would you say or do?
Take as much time as you need.
Yep, could say that. What else?
Offer work hours.
Offer different work hours, yeah.
Flexible.
Yep.
If it is too much bothering you and intruding into your life, normal life, would you like to talk to your GP and then get another medication that might work for you properly?
Yeah, I'd say, does your GP know about this? Have you had a conversation with the GP? Yeah. Yep, good. But I think that they're all good. What else?
I was going to say thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Michelle, I love that, because that's what I would do, and often people forget that, because it takes courage, doesn't it, to share. We've talked about some of the stigma. We've talked about you know, that like there's a lot of people with mental illness that don't ever share it because of that stigma, and because people will maybe think of them as different, so and less, or you know, incapable or vulnerable or weaker in some way. So if somebody discloses that, shares that with you, like I don't take that lightly, you know, and to thank somebody is a lovely recognition of that. So that's beautiful. Often, the obvious, I guess for me, I think, okay, so an obvious thing would be, well, let's have some late, if we can, let's have some late start times then, or change the work hours. But if I give that to Chanel as a solution, then what I've done is I've just kind of, I've taken away her capacity to think of something that might work for herself. And she might come up with that as a solution anyway. But if I say, so thank you for sharing, Chanel. What do you think we could do here then? How are we going to manage this? What would work for you? You know, I'd say probably, you know, have you had a conversation with the GP about some of the effects? And what's going to work for you? What are some of the things that you can think of? Then Chanel starts thinking, and she starts thinking in ways that I have no idea about, because I don't know what she needs and what would work for her. But in my head, I might have thought, well, what can we offer? Like if it's a shift kind of work and actually that's not negotiable, that's not an option, then I want to know that as well. So I've got my ideas, but I ask her what she needs. And that's what I mean by being a manager or a leader. It's like we're so good at finding solutions, you know, and problem solving, that like it's just it's a default thing that we think of to do because we're good at it. But sometimes the better thing is to actually, you know, not do that. Does that make sense? All right, so you're gonna, it says practice having an "Are you okay?" conversation. You can make it a well-being conversation. Okay, so don't feel like you have to like get into the nitty-gritty, or you know, drag out the you know, the emotional or the mental illness stuff. I want you just to have a bit of a sense of, you know, if you're going to have a, you know, let's check in. You know, I've been a bit concerned about you recently. Wow, I've noticed that you haven't taken your lunch, you know, with us. Like we used to have lunch together all the time, and I just haven't seen you over the last couple of weeks. You just have taken your lunch and you're sitting back at your computer. I'm just wondering, is everything okay? Is everything all right for you? I'm here to talk with. If you want to have a conversation about something that's going on for you, you know, here I am. Can we go and have a coffee? So I'd like you to partner up and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Okay, so there's enough. So partner up and just spend a minute, and then I'll say switch. And so one of you will be kind of asking the other as if you were a manager. That's the pretend. That's the kind of role play thing. Now, can I ask that you don't disclose anything that's like really traumatic, okay? So don't use this as a therapy session. You can come and see me afterwards, you know, if you want to have a conversation about anything, happy to have a conversation with you after. So don't use this as a big therapy session. Just have a bit of a, you know, you could make it a bit of a pretend thing. And one of you is manager and the other is employee. You're going to have an "Are you okay?" or a well-being conversation. And then I'll say switch, and then the other one will be manager. Any questions about that? Okay, so partner up and decide who's going to be manager first. So what's something that when you did that activity just then, what's something that your manager said or asked or did that you thought was helpful?
She was very understanding.
Uh-huh. And how did you know she was very understanding?
She didn't judge.
Great. How did you know she wasn't judging?
She may have been judging.
But it felt like she wasn't. Yeah. It's good to know. It's good to kind of break it down so that, like, in terms of behaviours, because then when you're in that role, then you can adopt those behaviours as well. You know how they're likely going to land. Yeah. So whatever you did then was good, because he felt unjudged and felt that you were understanding. Yeah. Great. Okay. So what else? What's something else that a manager in that little exercise did or said that you thought was helpful?
Attentive body language.
Uh-huh. So can you give us some examples?
Just eye contact and a
Yeah.
relaxed pose. So not up.
Beautiful.
Someone with folded arms, come relaxed.
Yeah.
Just because in a relaxed posture as well. Do it in a relaxed setting.
Yeah. Beautiful. So relaxed posture, eye contact, kind of affirmative body language. So when you nod and smile, and you know, sometimes when you lean in, so relaxed can be good because you're not stressed, but also leaning in can be helpful sometimes as well, because it helps people feel like actually you're really paying attention and you're involved, you're engaged. Yeah, beautiful. What else?
Felt connected and relatable.
And how? What specific behaviours or what was said that helps you feel that way?
She could really understand the problem quickly, and she could pinpoint why I'm feeling in a certain way, and could readily give a solution that, or suggest a solution that could readily work, and help me to understand that side of that solution.
Okay. So having said that, hold that thought. Having said what I said before about how managers and leaders are really good at finding solutions, and sometimes it's good not to come forwards with a solution, ultimately though, you are a manager. So it's providing that structure can be a nice securing feeling as well. Okay, so you know at some stage you'll probably in your career have to have conversations where you set boundaries. You might have to have a conversation with somebody who there is a disclosed or a suspected mental illness, and at the same time you're going through some performance management kind of process as well. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that structure can be a support. So yeah, having certainty, providing solutions, like you want to feel that your manager has kind of got this. Okay. Anyone asked a question, or their manager asked a question, you thought, wow, actually that was a really good question?
I thought Tim did a good job of asking a really open question but probing a bit further.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first question you asked was like, how have you been?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, you know, I've been a little bit stressed. And then he sort of worked further and asked more questions about, you know, why, like what's going on. So I thought that was good.
Great. So not just taking the first answer at, okay, so job done, walk away, but actually staying, and that shows interest, and that shows care, and that shows support, and asking questions in a way that help you kind of relax and trust him that he wants to know, but also that you feel safe enough to divulge some further information as well. Yeah, because you do want to know what's going on for your people, don't you? Anything else to add? Has it maybe from that activity, but maybe from your other experience as well of being in the workplace? And I should actually throw back to you, sir. What was it that you were going to say?
I was going to say, I was saying maybe some funny things, but Scott was like not pre-framed. He didn't have a pre-framed idea of what he was going to say to me, so he wasn't scripting it.
Mm-hmm.
He was reacting to what I said and having to build on it,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of what we want to do rather than walk in and say, "Are you okay?"
Yeah, so the "Are you okay" thing, it's a kind of it's a shorthand label, it's an awareness raising thing, but it and of itself is not necessarily the right question to ask because it's a yes, no, what do you do if they say no, So but it's a good kind of flag. It's like a placeholder for we want to be doing more of this conversation. But ultimately, we want to be absolutely responding to what's in front of us. And sometimes that can take a while to get to because we're all at different stages in terms of confidence and exposure to this stuff and experience. So what I encourage you to do is to seek out opportunities to have some awkward conversations with people, basically, so that you get more practiced at that. And whether that's doing some peer work, or whether that's, as I say, contacting your EAP and getting some kind of coaching stuff, or just testing every once in a while, and even with your peers, it doesn't have to be like you as a manager or you as a leader, but have more conversations where you feel that you're getting experience, basically, and building on that. Because for some of us it's easier and some of it's not so easy, but for all of us it does become easier when you practice over time, and then you can relax in your confidence because you've got this. And you know what? Sometimes people think, but what if I say the wrong thing? What would you say? If I said, Bridget, I just don't know, I don't really want to do this because I might say the wrong thing. What would you say?
Saying anything is better than saying nothing.
Beautiful, because that's like going back to what Michelle was saying, that she has a feeling, she has an intuition, she might have seen some signs, you need to act on those. So what is more important than what you say is being there and being caring. So if I feel that that you care about me, that you actually are interested in me as a person, that you do want to support me, I'm not going to be so tied up with what specifically you're saying. And sometimes we say things that are clumsy or awkward or not the best way, like I certainly do that, and I'm sure that the same is true for you. So sometimes you might say something and then you might say, you know what, that just didn't come out right, or I said that in a really clumsy way. I'm sorry, can we go back and start again, or can I say that again? That didn't come out how I wanted it to sound. And people generally are forgiving, and if you're there sincerely in a place of care, then that if you say something clumsily, it's not the worst thing in the world. All right, so we're going to move on to just finish up with some stuff about self-care, and it's really important to be proactive, and the same is true for mental health. Mental health, there's some lucky people in the world that are born with a personality type that is agreeable and adjusted well and optimistic, and they don't have many life stresses in their childhood, so they don't have things that are just overload them and create those traumatic responses, and they live in Australia rather than some other parts in the world, and so there's some lucky circumstances for some people, but for most of us, most of the time, self-care is actually active. It's not something that happens by itself. We do need to take steps to increase our self-care and our resilience and our mental health and well-being. So thinking about it in terms of some buckets of work is one useful framework to apply here. So when we think about active coping, what might be some strategies that you would have that would fall into the social bucket?
Spending time with friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Surfing or whatever you like to do.
So you can combine, can't you? Emotional can be positive feelings. Positive emotions are really strongly correlated with good mental health as well. So I don't mean just happy. It can be feeling rewarded, feeling excited, feeling hopeful, feeling anticipating something positive. you know, feeling satisfied, feeling in awe, at wonder. You know, you might be out somewhere, you know, on the ocean or somewhere equally beautiful, and you just feel like this sense of just, or calm or peace or something. So they're all really great feelings to have, emotional connections with people. And sometimes these kind of tie together. So you might be somewhere social, doing something physical, and you're feeling just awesome. You know, that's brilliant. That's a great combination. Now this is true in the workplace as well. So you might have like a more muted palette of emotions in the workplace, maybe not quite as ecstatic as you would get in some other sort of non-work environments. But basically, you want to have a broad kind of emotional sort of vocabulary that you draw on, and including some physical and some social stuff. So you might have, you know, the step challenge, or you know, whatever physical thing works for you. Using the steps, using the stairs rather than a lift. Some sort of physical thing. Social, like it's so important in the workplace, isn't it, to build in time to have that social connection thing. Connection is super, super important. So what can happen when people start to feel mentally distressed is that, like, typically, what do we do? Withdraw. And that just cuts down on so many good things that are actually building blocks for mental health. So when we withdraw, we lose on our connections, we lose on, you know, the things that we're doing outside with people, physical stuff. So it's really good in a workplace if you can build those opportunities to maximise connection. It's one of our basic fundamental human needs, connection. Like, if there's 3 psychological needs that we all have, and to remember them is like A, B, C. Autonomy. So we want to have choice, we want to have volition, we're choosing to do things, we want to have influence and input into decisions. So that's the A, autonomy. B is belonging. We are social creatures, we do need to have relationships. I want to know that I matter to you and you matter to me as a group. And then the third one is competence, which is that thing that we talked about earlier on with what's mental health, realising your abilities, doing stuff you're good at, that's competence. So those 3 psychological needs, they're fundamental, and they're really important in terms of self-care as well. So what's something that, with the other, I mean, that could be maybe like, where would you put meditation? I don't know, or mindfulness, maybe that would go in the other bucket. What's something that one of you does, apart from what we've said so far, that you think actually that is a self-care strategy? Who's got another example? Yeah, we can do 2.
I go to the gym of a morning as opposed to an evening, because I know that I just have a better day.
Yeah.
So even though I'm still getting the exercise either way,
Yeah.
I know that even though I hate getting up when it's dark, that I'll have a much better.
Beautiful. So that's self-care, that's proactive self-care, and really great self-insight, isn't it? You know, knowing what works for yourself in terms of when your energy level is high, and you can utilise that and expend it and set the tone for the day.
To expand on that is understanding your team, because I'm the opposite to that.
Yeah.
Whereas I finish work and then do some activity so that I don't dwell on it for the rest of the night, and then I sleep better.
Yeah.
Finishing work, sitting at home, having dinner, watching TV with everything that I've done
Yeah.
in my mind, because I can get up, go to work, deal with the day at work, and then just have a fresh start. So
Knowing yourself. Yeah. Exactly. Not thinking that just because I'm a morning person, then we'll do stuff in the morning when I'm really awake, because it might take somebody else a bit longer to wake up because they're a night person. Yeah. So it's being aware of differences. Was there something here that you wanted to share?
I try to learn new things, you know, to
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. Growth. That's great that you brought that up. Thank you. That's beautiful. All right. So rest is really important. So daily rest is important. So what we know in terms of health and well-being is that it's not good to wait until you're 4 weeks at the end of the year. Okay? It's not good to wait until the weekend. You want to build rest points, mini rests, into your day, and that will be more optimizing of mental health and physical health as well, actually. So this is all based on research. So we know breaks, so work breaks scheduled earlier in the day actually are better for people. What I wanted to say about psychological detachment, so that's number 2. What that is you know when you leave work, but you don't actually, you leave work physically, but you don't leave work mentally. So you could be on a beach in the middle of the most beautiful, you know, island in the world, swimming with dolphins, whatever you're doing. And if you're thinking about work psychologically, like what's going on, what would it be like when I get back there, that actually is not an effective recovery for you. So you won't, so you know how stress levels and, you know, well-being, it can go up and down. You need to recover. So we do need recovery periods. It's like, you know, building muscle. We shouldn't be pushing and demanding all the time. We do need effective recovery. So psychological detachment is really important for effective recovery. And what we know is that if you've got somebody who is attached to their work and doesn't psychologically detach, that actually is going to inhibit your ability to detach as well. Because you get home and your partner starts talking about their day and they're really attached to it still, they haven't let it go, what's it going to do to your thinking? It's going to draw you back to your day as well.
I have this problem.
Do you?
Yeah, like, because I used to work for Telstra and was
Yeah.
like very sales oriented.
Yeah.
So you have to, like, you're constantly thinking about, like, making targets, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of learnt to detach from work.
Okay.
And now I don't have that issue anymore.
Brilliant.
My partner has just started working for Flight Centre.
Right.
And she's having the same issue. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
you just got to think about it. Like, what can I do? What could you possibly do now that you once you leave the doors? Like, you can't do anything. So there's no point dwelling on it until you get back into the office.
Yeah. So some people do these like little routines that they have, little sort of patterns that they do to sort of psychologically detach. And so I know people that like they drive out of work and then the first corner that they turn, they leave all their work stuff mentally at that corner, and then they drive on and they've left it there, and then when they come back in the next day they kind of pick it back up. So you do these sort of, you know, things in your mind that help you kind of compartmentalize and leave things in one place rather than taking them to another. There's a thing called the third space. I want to say Adam Spencer, I think that might be his name. Anyway, the third space. So what it is it's using those moments in between things to review, reset, and then go again. So in between meetings, in between tasks, in between work and home or home and work, you know, your home might be really stressful and you go to work to recover, you know, depending on what you've got going on at home. But it's using that space, so like what has just gone on. What do I need to review there? Okay, recover. It might be some deep breathing, you know, sighing out, getting rid of stuff, letting it go, and then thinking forwards. Okay, reset. Now I'm ready. So I watch tennis, and I really admire, you know, you can see in tennis players when they're able to use that space between a point or between a game or between a set to like let go from what has happened and then start again, reset, recover, go forwards. It's very effective. All right, so here's some rest ideas. So we're just nearly finished out of time actually. So I just wanted to remind you of these things. I'm sure you know all these things already, but remind you of these things. And so what I would encourage you to do is to think about one thing. It might be on that list or it might be from something that you know that you do already. And just make a little commitment to yourself, a little promise to yourself to do it a bit more. So when you've got your thing in your head, whether it's from there or in your own kind of repertoire of self-care strategies, the thing that you're going to think, that you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do that a bit more, turn to the person next to you and share what that is. So yeah, what rest or recovery thing are you going to do more of? Either from there or your own list. All right, and coming back to the group. So how we're going to finish is we're going to go around and share what is our takeout? Actually, I might write these down. So what is, out of all the things that we've talked about tonight, what is the biggest takeout, the biggest takeaway for you? So Nick, what's yours?
Being more observant.
I've picked up one that doesn't work. Being more observant about?
Other people and myself.
Okay. Being more observant. Okay. Next?
Just to be like an open manager so that people feel confident enough to come and speak to me if need be.
Yeah. Great. Next?
We didn't really talk about it, but I thought you were very great at being inclusive.
Okay.
You used everyone's name that you knew, you brought
All
back
three of them.
everyone's questions, and you
Okay.
revisited and being inclusive.
Okay. So that's your takeout, like I kind of demonstrated that of being inclusive. Oh, that's sweet. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. That's really nice feedback. Next?
I really liked the graph and kind of seeing quite visually that different people fit into different, I guess, areas of their mental health and mental illness, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
Different kind of scale.
Yeah, beautiful. So I call that, I made it up, so the mental health, mental illness matrix. So I've got that. Beautiful. Thanks.
Influence that a leader can have.
Yep.
on staff.
Yep. Great. Good to know, isn't it? Good to remember. Influence that a leader can have. Next.
Call EAP and use that resource as well.
What was the first one? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Call the EAP and equip yourself. That's a source that I didn't know that you could do.
So EAP and what?
I said call them.
Oh, call them. Sorry. Call EAP. Yep.
And then you can equip yourself with certain ideas and
Right.
react and how to solve the problems your employee might have.
Okay. I'm going to put call EAP and solve problems. Yep. Brilliant.
I don't know about that. We offer it like every
I didn't know about that either. We
Check
were
it out,
pretty
what you've
active
got.
on EAP, like,
Yeah, check it out. It's really underutilized. Yeah, beautiful.
Ensuring that mental health and mental illness is decoupled from people's lives.
Yeah. Nicely put. Next.
Not jumping straight into trying to find a solution for somebody that comes to you with a problem.
Yep.
My title is literally solutions manager. So that's the first thing I try and do is sort of just taking a step back and A, listening, and then B, seeing how they'd like to resolve it before offering my side of it first.
Great. Because that's
My turn.
those three needs I said, autonomy, you're giving somebody autonomy by doing that. Yeah. Chanel.
It's a really small thing, and it wasn't until you mentioned about the like habits on the way home from work that since I've stopped walking to and from work and I drive at the moment, I do take more home with me.
Okay.
And I didn't really notice until you mentioned
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, that made a big difference.
Okay. What am I going to write about that?
What did you
Detaching,
call it?
psychological
Yeah,
detachment.
um,
So detaching from work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. So you could play with some strategies that will work for you to help you detach. Yeah. Great. Check out the third space as well. Google it. There's a YouTube clip. It's really good. Yep.
Mine's probably, I invest a lot of this into my team. I probably need to take more care of myself.
Self-care.
I spend a lot of
Yeah.
time checking in with okay,
Yeah.
talking with them, but
Yeah.
I don't probably take that time for myself.
Yeah. Beautiful insight. That's great. Thank you. Yep. So, not judging. Okay, that's very honest. Thank you. I think that's true for all of us. So,
Mine was more around that active coping and building resilience.
yeah,
To
yeah, great. Yeah, active. Excellent. Thank you.
I found the concept that mental illness is quite, or mental health is quite fluid.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can move along the
Yep.
spectrum quite easily.
Yep. Beautiful. Thanks.
For me, I think it was a reminder that it's not so much what you say, it's I guess the intent behind
Yeah.
what you say, and the importance of I guess practicing those conversations, because it's the only way you're going to get better at it.
Yeah. True. Thank you.
I was on a funny little thing that was something you mentioned around your team through pushing back.
Uh-huh.
So working banking, press royal commission, everything's coming down the line.
Right.
My leader pushes back, I'm like, thanks for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Take time to decouple.
Yep. Yep.
I think what was same as Ash's, the decoupling between mental illness and mental health, that perception of work.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of all get coupled into one.
Probably self-care.
Bit more of it?
Yeah.
Yep. Self-care. All right. Well, ladies and gents, we finished. Out of time. If anyone has a question afterwards and you want to just shoot that through, go through Jude. I'm happy to, you know, if there's anything that I can help you with. Obviously not be your counsellor. Put that out there now. But yeah, if there's any question, I'm absolutely happy to respond to that. So,
Could everybody please thank Tracy?